Claire Whitmore followed her quietest employee because she believed he was stealing from her company. Malcolm Reed left at exactly 5 o'clock every single day. He declined every overtime offer. He never attended company events. He kept his personal life so private that his colleagues had stopped asking. And for the past 60 days, his employee code had appeared beside a growing list of missing components: motor controllers, brake cables, battery connectors, small enough to carry out in a toolbox, valuable enough to matter. The internal investigation had been running for 2 weeks. Victor said the evidence was pointing in one direction. Claire wanted to see it herself. So on a Tuesday evening in November, when the rain came down in long diagonal sheets and the city turned gray and indifferent, Claire Whitmore followed Malcolm Reed off company property, onto a city bus, through 3 neighborhoods she had never visited, and into a street with a cracked sidewalk and a faded sign above a garage that read, "Riverside Auto Repair, Honest Service, Real People." She expected to find stolen parts, a side operation, a buyer, the quiet infrastructure of a man profiting from what he had taken. Instead, she found 6 broken wheelchairs, and families who had nowhere else to go, and rejection notices from her own company, soggy and flattened against the wet concrete, each one bearing a policy code she recognized and a signature she knew. Her own. She stood in the rain for a long time before she understood what she was looking at, and when she finally understood it, she stood there a little longer, because understanding it meant understanding something about herself that the upward curve on Victor's slide had made very easy not to see. Quick pause before we go further. If this story already has you, subscribe. This channel tells stories that don't get told anywhere else. And drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. I read every single one. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The rain started at 6:40. The same minute Claire Whitmore stepped out of the Whitmore Mobility Tower and into her car, and she watched it streak sideways across the windshield without really seeing it, because her mind was 3 blocks away, on a bus, watching a man she had built a case against. Malcolm Reed sat near the back, a canvas toolbox on his knees, his eyes on the window. He didn't check his phone. He didn't look around. He had the stillness of someone who had made this exact trip 1,000 times and no longer needed to think about it. Claire kept her car 2 lengths back, hood low, wipers on the slowest setting, telling herself this was due diligence, telling herself a CEO who signed off on an internal investigation owed it to the company, and, if she was honest, to Malcolm himself, to see the truth with her own eyes before she let Victor put a name to it. The bus hissed to a stop in a neighborhood she didn't recognize. Cracked sidewalks, chain-link fences, a laundromat with half its sign lit. Malcolm stepped off into the rain without an umbrella, shoulders squared against it like a man who had stopped noticing weather years ago. She parked across the street from a garage with a faded sign that read, "Riverside Auto Repair, Honest Service, Real People," and killed the engine. Through the open bay door, in the wash of a single hanging bulb, she saw him kneel beside a wheelchair. A girl sat in it, maybe 10, her hood pulled up against the damp that had gotten into the garage anyway. He said something. The girl laughed. Claire didn't move. She told herself she was gathering evidence. She didn't yet understand that what she was gathering was going to cost her something. 3 days earlier, none of this had existed. 3 days earlier, Whitmore Mobility was a company with rising revenue, a board that applauded itself twice a quarter, and a CEO who read spreadsheets the way other people read weather reports, quickly, confidently, and from a great height. Service margins are up 11% since the policy rollout, Victor Hale said at Monday's meeting, tapping through slides with the ease of a man who had built his career on being the one who delivered good numbers. Replacement package adoption is ahead of projection. Investors are going to love this quarter. Claire nodded. 36 years old, and she had learned to nod the way her father had taught her. Like agreement was a decision, not a reflex. And the missing inventory issue? She asked. Victor's expression didn't change, which was, in hindsight, the first thing she should have noticed. Still tracking one employee, he said. Diagnostics tech, motor controllers, brake cables, battery connectors, small stuff, but it adds up. His codes on the transaction logs for 11 of the last 60 days. Name? Malcolm Reed. She didn't recognize it immediately. Then she did. The quiet one. The one who fixed things other technicians gave up on. The one who never came to the holiday party. Keep building the file, she said. I don't want to move on a guess. Malcolm Reed had been at Whitmore Mobility for 6 years, and in that time he had earned a reputation for two contradictory things: being the best diagnostic technician in the building and being a man nobody could quite get a read on. He found an electrical fault in a lift assembly that 2 senior engineers had missed. He never mentioned it again. He showed a nervous apprentice how to properly seat a controller board, then let the kid take the credit in front of his supervisor. He remembered the names of customers who'd been in for repairs 8 months earlier. Not just their names, their kids' names, whether the last visit had gone well. And every day, at 5 o'clock, he put his tools away and walked out the door. Not 5:05, not just finishing this one thing. 5 o'clock, like a tide going out. He turned down overtime so consistently that people had stopped offering it to him directly, routing the extra hours to technicians who wanted the money. He didn't attend the summer picnic or the holiday party or the Friday drinks that half the floor treated as mandatory. He kept a photo of a girl on his desk, dark curls, gap-toothed smile, and when people asked about her, he said, "My daughter," and nothing else, in a tone that closed the door as gently and firmly as it had opened. People who rush out that fast usually have somewhere they don't want us to know about, Victor said, the day the first inventory discrepancy report crossed his desk. He wasn't wrong that Malcolm was hiding something. He was wrong about what. The confrontation happened on a Thursday, in front of the whole diagnostic floor, and Claire would spend a long time afterward wishing it hadn't. Not because Malcolm did anything wrong, but because of how she'd looked doing it. A demo unit had failed 2 hours before a major client walkthrough. Claire came down from the executive floor herself, which she almost never did, and told the technical team they were staying until it was fixed. Nods all around. Nobody argued. At 5 o'clock, Malcolm put away his tools. Claire watched him do it. Methodical, unhurried, the toolbox latches clicking shut in a room that had gone very quiet. And something in her, tired and frightened and unwilling to examine either feeling, came out sideways as anger. "Everyone else is staying," she said. Her voice carried farther than she meant it to. "Where could you possibly need to be that's more important than your job?" Malcolm looked at her, not defiant, not afraid, just steady, the way he was steady with everything. A wiring fault, a frightened apprentice, a CEO who had just asked him a question in front of 30 of his coworkers. Some responsibilities don't become less important because a CEO can't see them, he said. Then he picked up his toolbox and walked out. Nobody spoke for a moment. Claire stood there with the eyes of the room on her, aware that she had just lost something in that exchange, though she couldn't yet name what. Victor found her 20 minutes later. "I can have security follow him tonight. See where he's really going." "No," Claire said, surprising herself. "If I'm going to end a man's career, I want to see it myself, not read it in a report." She told herself that was integrity. She didn't yet know it was the only honest instinct she'd had all week. So she followed him, onto the bus, through the rain, into a neighborhood that didn't appear on any map she used, and now she sat in her car, across from a garage with a hand-lettered sign, and watched Malcolm Reed kneel in a doorway of yellow light, working on a child's wheelchair, with the same unhurried care he brought to a failing lift assembly. She had come looking for a thief. She watched him disappear fully into the garage, swallowed by the light and the rain and the sound of a bell somewhere inside, ringing once, and she did not start her car. She sat there, soaked wipers ticking against the glass, and understood, without yet knowing why, that she was not going to like what she found if she got out. She got out anyway. The rain had soaked through her jacket by the time she crossed the street, and Claire told herself that was the only reason she was shaking. She hadn't planned to follow this far. She'd told herself, back at the office, that watching him board the bus would be enough. A confirmation of pattern, something to hand to the investigators. But she'd stayed on his trail through 3 transfers and a walk past a pharmacy, where she'd watched through the window as he counted bills into a cashier's hand for a bag of medicine, carefully, like the amount mattered. He'd stopped once more before the garage, an apartment building with a buzzer system missing half its labels, and come out without his toolbox, carrying instead a bag of groceries he left with an elderly woman who opened her door only wide enough to take them and press his hand between both of hers before he pulled away, gently, and kept walking. None of it looked like a man building a criminal enterprise, but Claire was still telling herself, right up until she stood across from Riverside Auto Repair, that there had to be a warehouse somewhere, a buyer, a ledger, something that would make the story she needed to be true. Then the lights came on inside. Not the single bulb she'd first seen, but a full bank of overheads, and the garage opened itself to her like a stage. There were no cars. There were wheelchairs, 6 of them, in various states of disassembly, lined against the far wall, like patients waiting for a doctor who'd only just arrived. A mobility scooter with its seat off, a walker missing a wheel, a hospital bed frame, folded and leaning against a workbench, crowded with tools that had clearly been used that day and the day before, and every day for longer than Claire wanted to think about. And people, 4 families, sitting on folding chairs and upturned crates, holding numbered tickets, waiting with the particular patience of people who had learned that waiting was sometimes the only thing available to them. Malcolm moved through the room like he owned it. Because he did, pulling a coverall over his work shirt, rolling his sleeves, calling an elderly man by name before he'd even reached him. "Mr. Ferris, let's see what that scooter's been telling you." Claire stood in the rain outside the bay door, unseen, and watched a woman with careful hands lean toward her. She hadn't heard anyone approach. "First time?" the woman asked, not unkindly, gesturing at Claire's soaked white coat, like it marked her as a stranger, in a place strangers rarely came. Yes, Claire managed. "He'll get to you when he can. He always does." The woman smiled, tired but real, and nodded toward the hand-lettered sign taped above the workbench. "If you can pay, help the next family. If you can't, you are still welcome." Claire read it twice. She thought of the words service optimization and replacement package adoption, and the applause that had followed them across a boardroom table 2 days before, and something in her chest went very quiet and very cold. She watched Malcolm work. He didn't rush. He tested a controller, frowned, tried something else, and when the scooter finally hummed back to life under his hands, Mr. Ferris stood from his chair and walked 3 unsteady but unassisted steps across the garage floor, for what was, Claire understood from the way the room went still, the first time in weeks. Someone near the back rang a small brass bell, and a boy in a booster seat by the wall let out a whoop when his own chair, wheeled forward next, blinked its charge light green. Nobody paid Malcolm anything. Nobody was asked to. Claire's eyes drifted to a stack of papers pinned beneath a socket wrench on the workbench, curling at the edges from the damp that got in every time the bay door opened. She stepped closer, still not fully inside, still telling herself she was an observer and nothing more. Rejection notices, a dozen of them, maybe more, each stamped with a logo she'd approved the redesign of herself 18 months ago. Whitmore Mobility, service denied, warranty expired, model discontinued, repair not financially authorized, replacement recommended. She picked one up without deciding to. The customer's name meant nothing to her. The policy code at the bottom meant everything. She'd seen that code in a slide deck, in Victor's confident cadence, in her own signature scrawled beneath a line that read, "Approved. C. Whitmore." Behind her, a woman was telling another woman, in the low voice people use for things that still embarrass them, that Whitmore had quoted her more than she made in 2 months to fix her son's chair. Malcolm did it for the cost of a bearing, she said. $12. Claire set the paper down, like it had gotten hot. Dad! The voice cut through the noise of the garage, bright and unbothered by any of the weight Claire was carrying, and she turned to see a girl rolling out from a back room in an old wheelchair, one wheel audibly wobbling, a flashlight balanced in her lap. Malcolm crossed to her before she'd finished speaking, dropping into a crouch beside the chair, the way he had for every device in that room. Except this time, something in his face changed, softened and sharpened at once. The particular expression of a father whose whole day narrows down to one person. Let me guess, he said. Bearings again. You always say bearings, the girl said, handing him the flashlight with the solemnity of someone passing off a sacred object. It's never the bearings. One of these days it's going to be the bearings. Zoe, and I want you to remember I called it. She grinned, gap-toothed, and Claire recognized her instantly from the photograph on Malcolm's desk, the one she must have walked past 100 times without truly looking at. He worked under the awning where the light was better, Zoe holding the flashlight at an angle he adjusted twice without looking up, narrating the whole process for her like a lesson she'd asked for 1,000 times and never tired of. See here, the axle's fine. It's the bracket that's loose. Told you it wasn't the bearings. You didn't tell me anything. You're finding out right now, same as me. Details. Zoe laughed, and the sound of it did something to Claire that the numbers on Victor's slides never had. She watched the tenderness of it, the ease, the years of practice in it. A father who had clearly done this exact repair, or one like it, more times than either of them could count, and only slowly did the shape of the truth arrange itself in front of her. He left at 5 o'clock because he picked up his daughter. He turned down every extra hour because those hours belonged to a garage with a bell on the wall and a sign that asked nothing of the people who couldn't pay. He never talked about his personal life because his personal life was this: a girl who needed a wheelchair he couldn't always afford to keep running, and a company, her company, that had made keeping it running as difficult as it could and called the difficulty a policy. Claire's gaze went back to the wheelchair Malcolm was kneeling beside now, working the bracket loose, with a patience she suddenly understood wasn't patience at all. It was practice born of necessity, repeated so many times it had worn itself smooth. She looked at the frame. At the small manufacturer's plate riveted near the footrest, half obscured by a strip of colored ribbon Zoe had clearly tied there herself. Whitmore Mobility. The realization arrived the way cold water does, not gradually, but all at once, closing over her. The chair was one of theirs. And somewhere in the stack of curling, rain-damp forms on that workbench, under a policy code she had personally signed off on 6 months ago, was very likely the record of Malcolm Reed being told that his daughter's wheelchair, outdated, unprofitable, no longer worth the company's time, was not. Zoe saw her first. Dad! She tugged his sleeve, nodding past him toward the bay door. The lady from your work has been standing in the rain for like 10 minutes. Malcolm turned. For a moment he didn't move at all, just looked at Claire standing there in her ruined white coat, rain running off her jaw, a rejection notice still creased in her hand from where she'd set it down, and hadn't quite let go of the memory of holding it. He wasn't embarrassed. That was the thing Claire would remember most clearly afterward. She had braced herself for a man caught, and what she found instead was a man disappointed, which was worse in every way that mattered. Ms. Whitmore, he said, standing, brushing his palms against his coveralls. You should come in out of the rain. You'll catch something. She stepped inside. The families on the folding chairs had gone quiet, watching with the particular wariness of people who recognized a name on a logo even when they didn't recognize a face. I need to know if you stole from my company, Claire said. It came out smaller than she meant it to. Malcolm didn't answer right away. He crossed to a metal cabinet against the far wall, unlocked it with a key from his pocket, and pulled out a thick accordion folder, setting it on the workbench between them, with the same unhurried care he gave to every repair in that room. "Receipts," he said, opening it. "Every part I've used in the last year. Purchased, salvaged from decommissioned units the company scrapped, or donated by families who no longer needed them. Serial numbers logged against each repair. Photos, before and after, dated." He turned the folder toward her. "You're welcome to check every one against your inventory records. I imagine you will anyway." Claire stared down at pages of his handwriting, careful, consistent, the handwriting of a man who had done this work knowing, someday, someone would ask him to prove it. "Then why does your employee code show up next to missing components?" she asked. "Motor controllers, brake cables, 11 times in 60 days. "Because someone wanted it to." He said it without heat, the way he'd say a diagnosis. "I've flagged the same discrepancy pattern to loss prevention twice this year. I have the timestamps." He pulled a second, thinner folder from the cabinet. "And these." He set it beside the first. Claire opened it and found printouts, internal reports, formatted the way every employee concerned went up the chain at Whitmore, dated over 8 months. Repair denial pattern, legacy models. Emergency service fee impact, low-income accounts. Employee access codes appearing on transactions outside shift hours. Each one stamped received. Each one, according to the server log printed beneath it, deleted from the executive review queue within minutes of arrival. "I never saw these," Claire said. "I know. No accusation in it. Just fact. You didn't know their names either, the families in those denial letters, but you knew the numbers. The margins went up 11%. I heard that in the break room. It travels fast, and nobody in that boardroom asked what the 11% was built out of." He closed the folder gently. "You approved a policy that made people the most profitable exactly when they were the most helpless. Not knowing their faces doesn't make the decision any less yours." Claire opened her mouth and found nothing sufficient to put in it. "Why didn't you come to me directly?" she finally asked. "Not a report. Me." Malcolm looked at her for a long moment, and when he answered, his voice hadn't changed at all, which somehow made it land harder. "People like me don't reach your office by telling the truth, Ms. Whitmore. We reach it when someone needs a suspect." He nodded toward the folder of deleted reports. "I tried the truth for 8 months. It didn't survive the trip up." Behind him, Zoe had wheeled closer, listening with the frank attention of a child who hadn't yet learned to pretend she wasn't. She held out a towel, grabbed from a hook by the workbench, slightly grease-stained, offered without ceremony. "Here," she said. "You're dripping on Dad's floor." Claire took it. Her hands weren't quite steady. "Do you make the rules at Dad's company?" Zoe asked. It wasn't accusatory. It was the plain, devastating curiosity of a child who genuinely wanted to understand how the world had been built this way. "Yes," Claire said, "I do." Zoe looked past her, at the 6 wheelchairs lined against the wall, at the rejection notices curling on the bench, at her own chair with its bracket freshly tightened and a strip of purple ribbon tied where the frame had been welded once before. "Then why do the rules make his job harder when he's helping people?" Claire had no answer. She had built a career on always having an answer. For the board, for investors, for reporters who asked about margins and models and market share. And she stood in a rain-lit garage with grease on the floor and a 12-year-old's question sitting in her chest like a stone. And she had nothing. "I didn't know," she said finally, and hated how thin it sounded even as she said it. "I believe you," Malcolm said. "That's the part that should bother you more, not less." She promised she'd look into it. The words felt smaller, leaving her mouth, than they had in her head. "I'll launch a formal review. I'll pull the server logs myself. I'll fix this." And Malcolm listened to all of it with the calm, unreadable patience of a man who had heard promises from people above him before. "I'd like to believe you," he said, when she'd finished. "I'm not sure I do yet." It was, Claire thought, the most honest thing anyone had said to her in a very long time. She was still in the car outside the garage, engine running, unable to make herself pull away, when her phone lit up with a message from Victor. Board pulled together an emergency session for 8 a.m. Wanted you to know before you walked in blind. She frowned and called him. He picked up on the second ring, already talking. Security flagged Reed's after-hours activity tonight. Unauthorized use of company-adjacent equipment. Potential resale operation. I've recommended immediate suspension pending termination. I didn't want to move without looping you in, but given the exposure, if this leaks before we act. Victor. Her voice came out harder than she intended. I was there tonight. I saw the garage myself. A pause. Brief enough that a less attentive person might have missed it. Then you understand why we can't let this sit, he said smoothly. Sympathetic story or not, the man's been running an unauthorized operation using company knowledge, and possibly company parts, for months. The board needs to see decisive action. I've already had the folder prepared. What folder? Inventory records. The transaction logs. It's a clean case, Claire. 8 a.m., we present it, we suspend him, and this stops being a liability by lunch. Claire sat in the dark, rain drumming on the roof of her car, and thought of a folder of receipts stacked neatly in a metal cabinet, 3 feet from where a girl named Zoe rang a small brass bell every time someone got their dignity handed back to them. Victor, she said carefully, don't do anything before that meeting. Of course, he said, in the tone of a man who had already decided not to listen. See you at 8. He hung up before she could say anything else. By the time Claire pulled away from the curb, the lights of Riverside Auto Repair fading small and yellow in her mirror, security had already been dispatched to seize equipment from a garage 2 miles behind her, and a termination file with Malcolm Reed's name on it was sitting, printed and ready, on Victor Hale's desk. By the time Claire reached the office at 6 the next morning, Malcolm Reed had already been suspended. She found out from a mass email, not from Victor directly, a curt notice to department heads citing an active internal investigation into unauthorized use of company resources. Effective immediately, security escort noted, badge access revoked. She read it twice, standing in the elevator, and by the time the doors opened onto the executive floor, her jaw had set into something that made her assistant take one look at her and reschedule 2 calls without being asked. She went straight to the garage's case file, which Victor had helpfully, too helpfully, already compiled into a single binder waiting on her desk. Transaction logs, security footage timestamps, a memo, dated that morning, recommending immediate termination to limit reputational and legal exposure. She didn't open it further. She had spent the night doing something Victor didn't know about yet. The boardroom filled at 8 sharp, 11 directors around a table that had approved every number Victor had ever brought them, without asking where the number had come from. Victor stood at the head of it with the easy posture of a man who had already won, clicking through a slide deck that put Malcolm's photo, his employee badge photo, unsmiling, taken years ago, beside a red highlighted spreadsheet of missing inventory. 11 flagged transactions in 60 days, Victor said, corroborated by an unauthorized off-site operation discovered last night, using company knowledge and, we believe, company-adjacent parts. I recommend the board approve termination for cause, effective today, and a public statement distancing the company from any. Where's Malcolm now? Claire asked. Victor blinked, mildly thrown by the interruption. Home. Suspended. As of 6 this morning. Standard procedure. You suspended him before I'd seen the case. You'd already indicated you witnessed the operation yourself last night, Victor said, smooth as ever, though something moved behind his eyes now, some small recalibration. I didn't think there was a case left to build. Claire let the silence sit for a moment. Around the table, a few directors exchanged glances, the kind that meant they'd noticed something in her tone before they could have named what it was. There's a box outside this building right now, she said. with Malcolm Reed's 14 years of professional belongings in it, because you decided last night wasn't worth waiting until morning to act on. I'd like everyone here to sit with that for a second before we go any further. Victor's smile didn't waver, but it thinned. Claire, I understand the emotional weight of what you saw last night, but sentiment can't drive a termination decision. The numbers are the numbers. That's the exact thing I've been telling myself for 6 months, Claire said. I'm done saying it. She opened her laptop and turned the room screen toward her own presentation, one she'd built alone at 3 in the morning at her kitchen table. In a shirt still damp from the rain she hadn't bothered to fully dry off from the night before. I have a question first, she said, looking directly at Victor now. Why were Malcolm's reports deleted from the executive review queue 3 minutes after they arrived? All 8 of them. Over 8 months? The room went very still. I don't know what you're referring to, Victor said. Server logs. Claire clicked, and the timestamps filled the screen. Receipt times beside deletion times, 3 minutes apart. Every single time. An administrative signature attached to each one that wasn't Claire's and wasn't Malcolm's. Tay pulled these for me last night. It took them 4 hours. It would have taken less if I'd known what I was looking for sooner. She let the directors read the screen in silence. Every report Malcolm Reed filed about repair denials, emergency fee impact, and employee codes appearing on transactions he never made, deleted before it ever reached me, by an account with administrative access to the review queue. She clicked again. One account has that access. It's yours, Victor. That's a serious accusation to make in front of the board without. I also pulled the resale contractor records, Claire continued, voice level. The ones showing where missing components actually went. Not out the door in Malcolm's toolbox. Into a vendor relationship you set up 11 months ago. Parts flagged as scrapped, resold at a markup, the loss written off against inventory shrinkage, and quietly folded into service optimization savings. Malcolm's employee code was used on transactions logged after his shift ended. He was 2 bus transfers away at the time, at a garage full of witnesses. I checked. Nobody spoke. Victor's composure was still mostly intact, but his eyes had gone flat and calculating. A man doing rapid math on how much of the room he still had. You needed a name attached to the discrepancy, Claire said, quieter now. Malcolm was already suspicious to people looking for a reason to be suspicious. Quiet, private, out the door at 5 every day. Easy to point at. He filed 1 too many reports asking why customers were being denied repairs they should have qualified for, and you needed him discredited before anyone else started asking the same question. This is speculation dressed up as an audit, Victor said, finally, to the table, rather than to her. It's 40 pages of documentation, Claire said. The board can read it themselves. She closed her laptop. I'm terminating your employment, effective immediately, and I'm turning this file over to legal for review of the resale contract. And I'm telling this board, on the record, that I share responsibility for what happened to Malcolm Reed. Victor manipulated the records. I built the culture where manipulating them was profitable enough to be worth the risk. Nobody objected. 2 directors were already reading ahead in the printed pages she'd distributed. Victor stood, gathered nothing, and walked out of the room with the stiff, unhurried dignity of a man trying very hard to look like he'd chosen to leave. Malcolm answered his door that evening, in a t-shirt with grease still on one forearm, Zoe visible behind him at the kitchen table, half a homework assignment spread in front of her. Claire stood on the step, no umbrella this time, having decided somewhere on the drive over that showing up soaked twice in 1 week was at least honest. I cleared your name in front of the full board this morning, she said. On the record. Victor's gone, terminated, and legal's reviewing what he did for potential charges. Every deleted report, every diverted part, it's documented. Nobody in that building thinks you did anything but your job better than anyone else in it. Malcolm listened without interrupting, arms loosely crossed, the porch light throwing his face half into shadow. I'd like to offer you a position, Claire continued. A new one, head of an accessibility repair initiative. Full authority, real budget, reporting directly to me. You'd be the face of getting this fixed, company-wide, the way it should have been fixed from the start. Malcolm was quiet for a long moment. Behind him, Zoe had stopped pretending to do homework and was watching frankly through the doorway. I'm not interested in becoming the face you use to make people forget it happened, he said finally. A nice title on a policy that stays the same underneath it. I've seen that trick before, just never from this close. Then don't be the face, Claire said. Help me replace what's underneath it. He didn't answer right away. He looked at her for a long moment. Measuring, she thought, not the offer itself, but whether the woman making it had actually changed or had simply been caught. And then, without agreeing to anything, without softening the distance still sitting between them, he said only, I'll think about it. And closed the door, gently, the way he did everything. Malcolm called 3 days later, not to accept, but to negotiate, which told Claire more about the kind of partner he'd be than any resume ever could. If I do this, he said, it's not a favor, and it's not a redemption story for a press release. There are conditions. I'm listening. He had them written down. She could hear paper shifting on the other end of the line. Whitmore restores affordable repair options for discontinued models. No more pushing families toward replacements they can't afford when a repair would do. Emergency mobility repairs get priority processing, not a fee tier. Every customer gets a repair estimate before anyone mentions replacement. Riverside stays open, stays independent, stays mine. Not a company property, not a marketing location. Mine. We train local technicians instead of writing equipment off. And no family gets photographed or quoted for publicity without asking them first, in plain language, with no pressure to say yes. Claire wrote each one down as he spoke, though she suspected she'd remember them without the notes. All of it, she said. Done. You're agreeing pretty fast for someone who usually needs a board vote. I already had the vote, Claire said. It happened in your garage, in the rain, when your daughter asked me a question I couldn't answer. There was a pause on the line. Not quite warmth, not yet, but something that had stopped being purely guarded. Give me a few weeks to get Riverside covered, while I'm training people at your building, Malcolm said. I'm not leaving my regulars without someone who knows what they're doing. Take whatever time you need. He agreed. It wasn't friendship yet, but it was the beginning of something built on terms he'd set, which was, Claire had come to understand, the only kind of beginning that would ever hold weight with him. The policy changes moved faster than anyone at Whitmore Mobility expected, mostly because Claire stopped asking Victor's old team to implement them gently and started asking Malcolm's opinion on every draft before it went to the board. Discontinued models got a repair pathway again, budgeted rather than blocked. Emergency requests moved to the front of the queue instead of the back of a fee schedule. Every customer service rep went through a half-day training, taught in part by Malcolm himself, on what it meant to say, let's see if we can fix it, before, have you considered replacing it? Riverside Auto Repair kept its cracked sidewalk and its faded sign and its hand-lettered rule about who could pay and who couldn't. What it gained was donated diagnostic equipment that used to sit underused in a Whitmore warehouse, 2 paid apprentice positions filled by kids from the neighborhood, and a standing partnership with the community college 2 blocks over that sent students in on weekends to learn from a man they now called, with real respect, Mr. Reed. Zoe got her new wheelchair on a Thursday, through the same intake process any qualifying family now went through. No special favor, no executive override, just a repair-first policy that finally worked the way it was supposed to. The chair was properly fitted this time, built for her frame and not patched together from salvaged parts and hope. She tested it in the middle of the garage floor, under the same hanging bulb that had first drawn Claire's attention on a rainy Tuesday months before. She rolled one tight circle, braked hard, and looked up at her father with the flat, satisfied expression of a very serious engineer conducting a very serious inspection. Good, she announced. Now you can stop blaming the bearings on everything. the garage laughed. Malcolm loudest of all, the sound of it easy, in a way Claire hadn't heard from him before. Not once, in all the weeks she'd known him. Zoe rolled forward and rang the brass bell herself, both hands on the pull, grinning at the small crowd of regulars who'd gathered to watch. It was the same bell that had rung for Mr. Ferris and his scooter, for the boy in the booster seat, for every family who'd walked or rolled out of that garage with something working again. It rang the same for her as it had for all of them, which was, Claire understood now, exactly the point. Claire came back on a rainy evening in March, 4 months after the first time, and this time she didn't park across the street and wait. She walked through the front door. Malcolm looked up from a workbench cluttered with cable, one eyebrow raised, not quite surprised and not quite not. "You're early," he said. "Training session isn't until Saturday." "I'm not here for training." Claire shrugged off her coat, a plain one this time, not the white blazer that had once marked her so obviously as someone who didn't belong in a room like this. "I'm here because you once told a room full of strangers that if you can't pay, you're still welcome." I figured that meant something other than money, too. Malcolm considered that for a moment, then nodded toward a tangled heap of cables on the corner of the bench. "Start by sorting those," he said, "by gauge. Don't ask me why, just trust the system." She sat down beside Zoe, who was cataloging spare parts into labeled bins with the brisk authority of someone who had clearly been doing this long enough to correct adults about it, and began sorting cable in the rain-loud quiet of a garage that had never needed a company logo to mean something to the people who walked through its door. Outside, the rain kept falling the way it had the night this all began, long and gray and indifferent to who it fell on, board members and bus riders alike. But this time, nobody stood on the wrong side of the glass. Claire Whitmore had followed a man home because she believed he was taking something from her company. What she found instead was a man who had spent years quietly giving away the one thing her company had forgotten how to offer anyone: dignity, handed back one repair at a time, to people whose names never made it into a spreadsheet. The most damaging decisions are rarely made by cruel people. They're made by people who never have to meet the ones who live with them. Leadership doesn't begin with better numbers. It begins the moment the numbers stop being more important than the faces behind them.